Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Business Blaze. In this one, this is one of my favorite topics ever. This is a weird one. It's about this town called Fordlandia, which, yeah, he named it after himself. Henry Ford built in the middle of the rainforest. This one has been put together by Lawrence. Thank you, Lawrence. We're gonna go through it. We're gonna learn something together. If you have this was my idea to put through to do. Like I said, I really love this story. If you've got a business topic suggestion for Business Blaze that you would like us to cover, kind of, interesting stuff from business history that you've come across, or just present day, whatever, let me know in the comments below. Upvote the ones you like and we will make them, we'll get them written, and we'll learn something together. Today is we're gonna look at Fordlandia, Henry Ford, all of that stuff. Basically, it's this huge misstep, train wreck disaster that goes wrong, and then at the end is a really important business lesson which will be super useful. As most of you know, Henry Ford was the automotive genius that founded the Ford Motor Company, right there in his name. He was a mastermind of production efficiency and pretty much revolutionized the way that we build cars on a mass scale. What you probably don't know about Henry is his failed attempts to build his very own town in the middle of the Amazon rainforest. And I feel Lawrence missed here his very own, fully American town in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Why would anyone do such a thing? Good question, Lawrence. Well, the logic behind the move isn't quite as crazy as you would think. Cars need tires. The more cars you make, the more rubber you're going to need. Henry knew that the motor industry was going to go one way, and that was bigger. I feel like today you're like, yeah, obviously Ford, but he was a visionary, except when it came to building American towns in Brazil. You will see. In his wisdom, he thought that if he was in control of his own rubber supply, he could dominate the market even further by cutting costs. Seems pretty logical. You see, before coming up with this grand new plan, Ford had been buying his rubber from Asia like everyone else had been doing at the time. The world's rubber supply was controlled by producers in the Far East, and they didn't exactly sell it cheap. Well, they got a monopoly, If everyone has to buy from them, then, just jack up the prices, do a little bit of collusion, and make a ton of money. Ford, as an astute businessman, was not so happy. As you might imagine, Ford grew frustrated with his lack of bargaining power, and he wanted to take control of a major piece in the supply chain. He had seen British companies have success by tapping rubber from Amazonian trees, and he thought to himself, if I can't get a good deal from the dudes in Asia, why not just make the shit myself? I can do it. It's not hard. Turns out really hard. The idea of a rubber plantation town in the middle of the jungle, it doesn't sound like such a crazy idea now, does it? It actually doesn't. It sounds pretty reasonable. What could possibly go wrong? But as sound as the idea was from a business perspective, Henry was no prospector. He had no real experience in geography or rubber plantation, so he made a lot of really important decisions in this project based pretty much on some good old-fashioned gung-ho thinking. Spoiler alert, that gung-ho thinking was not enough. A deep knowledge of geography would have been, significantly more useful. Brazil has its own culture. The Amazon itself is a very diverse and unique landscape, famously so. So you'd think that a project like this would need some pretty hefty research and planning to pull it off. Yes, indeed you would, to state the obvious. Well, Mr. Ford, he didn't think so. He just pointed at some land and he said, that'll do. Then he rounded up some locals to form a workforce, and he was like, yeah, those dudes will do. And he added a few nice amenities, a dash of American culture, and hey presto, you've got your own little jungle town that's ready to dish out piles of rubber for next to nothing. I love how he's just like, yeah, American culture's the best. They'll love it in Brazil. Spoiler alert again, they didn't. Ford pumped 6 years and $200 million into Fordlandia before finally calling it quits, and he had nothing but a mob of angry townspeople to show for it. We're gonna get into all of this, but by the way, that's $200 million back in that day's money. That's around $3.5 billion in today's money, so this is not messing around. Fordlandia was a huge blunder that surprisingly few people recall today, although we're changing that with this video. Then again, if you're an industry titan and you hatched a giant scheme that completely capsized due to your own blindsided ignorance, you wouldn't exactly shout about it either, would you? No, in fact, I'd make extraordinary efforts to cover it up. More on that as we get into it. So, how big of a baby are we talking? Well, Ford ended up buying around 2.5 million acres of the Amazon rainforest for this project. Now, 2.5 million acres is not something we can easily visualize. I think like an acre is a reasonable amount of land to have like a property on, and you have plenty of, I think when I grew up, we had like an acre of garden. So I've got like a rough idea of what an acre is in my mind, but I don't really have any idea what was it, 2.5 million acres is. So Lawrence has included some examples for us. New York City is estimated to be about 200,000 acres in size, so think 12 times the size of that. Okay, that's fairly big. The Yellowstone National Park in Idaho is around 2.2 million acres in size, so Ford's land in the Amazon is about that size. It's like 300,000, it's 10% bigger than that, essentially, roughly. I wasn't really sure, I've never been to Yellowstone, I didn't really know how big it was. I looked it up on Google Maps, pretty fucking big! Of course, a society of this size would need more than a few houses and factories to survive. Henry Ford envisioned a haven in the middle of the forest. I mean, this was kind of like a haven for him. Not that he ever went. He never went to Fordlandia, by the way. Bonus fact there. He wanted workers to enjoy every American luxury that was common in the West. He built comfortable tract housing. Not really sure what tract housing is. I assume it's an American thing. It's part of American culture. Swimming pools, tennis courts, a hospital, a library, and even an exotic golf course. All of the things Brazilian peasants need. As the town grew, the population soared over the 6 years of its development. Bakeries, restaurants, and other micro-businesses started popping up. This all sounds quite good though, at least to me. At its peak in 1930, Fordlandia had nearly 10,000 residents. What was pulling them in? Well, wages more than anything else. I don't know, the conditions sound pretty good. Surely, I know it's like American culture, but like swimming pools and a golf course, I'd be pretty into that. I'm not American. The average worker was at the time paid around 20 cents a day in Brazil. Ford wanted to attract large swarms of workers very quickly, so he offered them nearly 40 cents a day. At this point, I'll be like, I'm pretty sold. Like if I'm making what I'm making now, and then Ford's like, come live in the jungle, there's a swimming pool and a golf course, and you gotta do some rubber stuff, but we're gonna pay you twice as much money as you now earn. I'd be like, all right, yeah, I'm still in Brazil. Sounds pretty good. This is where you're probably wondering where it all went wrong. The simple truth is rubber trees hate rocky soil and are not particularly fond of uneven ground or cramped conditions. What a surprise! Ford's gung-ho attitude and not hiring any geography people is coming back to bite him. How could we ever know? Unfortunately, all the land that Ford bought was incredibly rocky and slap bang on the side of a mountain. Oh no, it's all the things rubber trees hate. These trees like their own space, but Ford liked profit, so they planted as many of them as closely packed as they could in an attempt to maximize yields. Again, Ford probably should have talked to someone like a biologist, botanist. Who are the people who do trees? I think it's a botanist. You probably should have talked to a botanist, Henry. The other thing that tends to come with forests is loads of bugs. Yeah, when I think of the Amazon, I mostly think of bugs and that fish that swims up your penis when you pee in the river, which is actually not a thing, but I still think of it because it's scary. It's called a candiru. It's not real. I did a video on it on Today I Found Out. Another channel I do, I'll link to it below. Ford learns the hard way that the Amazon is filled with insects that literally love to feast on rubber trees. Again, Henry, you should have hired someone. It's a savage cycle. The trees being so close together made the perfect conditions for the bugs to wreak havoc, and Ford, thinking more trees would solve the problem, kept planting new trees which added to the fire. How did he think that would solve the problem? What were you thinking, Henry? There are loads of bugs because the trees are too close together. Let's plant more trees. The trees failed to grow properly because the conditions were terrible for them. No. The trees weren't the only living things to suffer from the conditions. Fordlandia's population also had serious issues. Henry Ford tried to bring America to the jungle, delivering a lifestyle filled with luxuries and ideals to people that were poor. This blessing of the American lifestyle came along with rules and mandatory activities like poetry reading, sing-alongs in English, strict 9-to-5 working hours, and perhaps the least American rule of all a ban on alcohol. Does a ban on alcohol ever sound like a good idea? No. I agree with you, Lawrence. It doesn't sound like a good idea. And that, the swimming pools and the golf courses and the making twice as much money is pretty appealing, but when they're like, you gotta go to a sing-along and do poetry and no drinking. The only way I would get through the sing-alongs and the poetry is with drinking. Disease and illness among the workers spread like wildfire, and many were killed by lethal insects that plagued the surrounding terrain. Hang on, are insects themselves lethal? Because that makes me think of giant insects. I think it's the diseases the insects carry, right? No one's being swarmed by locusts and eaten. I think. I've never been to the Amazon, but I'm pretty sure I'd know about that. The result They rebelled, of course. Riots became common, workers would destroy vehicles, throw material and tools into the local river, and generally revolted against their oppressive management overlords. Things got so bad towards the end that management was chased out of town, and the Brazilian military had to step in to stop the chaos. Henry, what have you done? In 1945, synthetic rubber was brought to market, which made all the natural rubber plantations pretty much redundant. Almost overnight, Ford's Fordlandia was ruined. His son, Henry Ford, sold the lands back to Brazil and closed the books on the whole project. I guess it's good news he has a synthetic rubber, but what did he spend? $3.5 billion? Jesus. Henry Ford never admitted that the project was a failure. He proclaimed the whole thing a hugely successful experiment in cultivation. The moral of this story, when you're a legendary visionary and you throw away millions of billions of dollars in today's money, throw away billions of dollars and years of investment into a tragically failed attempt at building your own jungle city, do yourself a huge solid and keep it a secret. I agree, and it's like, I feel like Trump might have learned something from Henry Ford here, because it's like, this isn't really working out. Just respond by saying it's a huge success, and then say that over and over again, no matter what the facts presented are. And eventually people seem to be like, well, I guess it was a huge success. Bonus facts. Henry Ford II, that's his son, sold Fordlandia back to the Brazilian government for $250,000, which is $200 million in today's money. So they took a bit of a hit on that. Another bonus fact, not a single piece of rubber from Fordlandia was ever used in a Ford car, and Henry Ford never set foot in the town. Yeah, that's pretty insane. Like, it was there for years, 10,000 people lived there, they built swimming pools, golf courses. Nothing was ever used. I love that story. This is one of my all-time favorite random business stories. If you liked it too, you know what to do. Hit that thumbs up button. If you've got suggestions, if there's another story out there like Fordlandia that you've heard of, I desperately want to know about it so I can get something written and we can go through it together, because I love this. This is great. Like I say, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you next time.